Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy. I have two guests today. I'm gonna let them talk about themselves here in a minute, but Mike Huber is one of our guests, and then Carrie Hahn is brand new to the show. So, Mike, tell folks who you are first, and then we'll let Carrie go since it's kind of going to be her show.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because I was saying right before we hit record that I usually don't introduce myself, so people probably mostly know me from the podcast,
Do
but
you
in
need me to do
case,
it for you since
no, no,
you
it's
don't hype
okay.
yourself? Okay.
So I think for the purposes of this recording, the most important thing is that I wrote Inclusion Includes Us and worked at an inclusive childcare center. And I did a lot of interaction, and this part comes up once in a while, but had a lot of interactions with the occupational therapists and speech language pathologists in various meetings. And I'm someone who kind of works through osmosis. We did an episode, I don't know, maybe a year ago about learning from other fields.
Yeah. I just referenced that episode in one I recorded over the weekend too. So
Perfect.
it's gonna be twice in a
Excellent.
fairly short,
Excellent.
relatively short period of time here.
And one of those people I almost learned from, well, I would say now I am still learning from, is Carrie.
Yeah. Good segue.
But it's just that we worked in the same building for, I don't know, probably a year and a half, and didn't really know each other, but someone kept saying, Anna, who has been on the show, Anna McCrae, kept saying, you two don't know each other?
That's so weird.
And so
in the
finally we
same
do.
building. Yeah.
I know. There was like, well, it was before the pandemic. There were like 500 people working there. So
okay.
It's not,
yeah.
And we certainly saw each other, but it'd be mostly a speech language pathologist brought a child like back to the classroom or something. So it wasn't like, there weren't conversations necessarily. I mean, from my role, they've talked to the teacher. It's not like there was no conversation.
Okay.
Okay, medication's clearly wearing off, but and this is Carrie.
It's Carrie's turn.
Yeah, so I'm a speech language pathologist, as Mike said, and I'm also an author of a book that we're going to discuss a little bit. The book is called Beyond Inclusion, Raising Anti Ableist Kids. And the way that I made it to writing that book, a very long story cut very short, is that I'm the mom of two kids, disabled, neurodivergent. And I wanted to create a resource that might move the needle a little bit in terms of equity for people with disabilities and making a more, a safer world for my own kids, but as just for disabled people in general. So, and I am self-diagnosed ADHD for like a year and a half. So, but the process of researching for the book, well, it started with researching when my son got diagnosed with ADHD, and then really kind of dove in. And I've since heard that one of the most ADHD things that you can do is you hear ADHD and you become a self-expert on ADHD by doing all the research about ADHD. Like if you go there, then congrats, like you figured it out, you've solved the puzzle. So
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm excited about the book. I want everyone to order it, of course, but I'm a little bummed that it's not coming until July.
They're like a little over 2 months out. It's getting here fast.
Yeah. So this is we're going to talk about inclusion and being anti-ableist. And one of the reasons I'm excited about it, I mean, Mike recommended you, and I really trust Mike on this. I trust Mike, but
clarification there.
This topic has been one for myself that has been one of the biggest areas of like curiosity and growth in the last 5 or 6 years for me. It kind of started like I always thought I understood inclusion, but in that time, I worked for a few years in a speech language preschool that was part of a Purdue University's Speech Language and Hearing Sciences department, working with SLPs and SLP grad students. And then Mike's book kept moving me a little bit further down the road, and I started to read more about disability rights and activism and things. And it's interesting. It feels important. It feels urgent
Yeah.
to me. Right now, I'm just finishing. I have 2 more weeks left, this week and next week, of the current section of our sort of special education and early childhood class that I teach at the college, and where I work, and we're using Mike's book in addition to some other resources. So I'm looking forward to having this one too for the next time I teach this. Anyway, so this episode, Mike's got the quote, so I'm going to let him start that off, and then
Yeah.
we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, and I had a hard time like shortening the quote because I think the whole thing is important here. So it's way deep in the book with the euphemisms for disability is the name of the chapter. And Carrie writes, identifying or being identified as disabled doesn't change anything about a person, but it can affect access to proper support and accommodation. Whether dyslexia is a disability is something that I have debated personally, so I'm going to share my train of thought for how I reached my own conclusion. As I noted earlier, it is not my place to decide for others, but these conclusions are only mine. I consider Pete, my dyslexic son, to be disabled. He has a learning disability. He needs access to reading and writing instruction appropriate for his neurology and accommodations like dictation and predictive text to support skills like writing and spelling. Dan needs access to Braille instruction, equipment and technology appropriate for his blindness, like Braillers, voiceover technology, and accommodations like a scribe or a chance to answer verbally when no Brailler is available, to support skills like writing. No one would question that my blind son is disabled, but many people would debate a designation of disability for my dyslexic son. Even though both have needs for access and accommodation to be able to participate and succeed. Many suggest that dyslexia isn't a disability because if the proper instruction at the proper level of intensity is provided, dyslexics can learn to read and write. The implication is that with the right supports, they no longer face a disadvantage. Isn't that true for everyone with a disability? So I know it's a long quote, but
no, but
you get to that point.
If you would have shortened and taken any of that off, it wouldn't have been the full, the full story there.
Yeah,
that's been an interesting part of my just understanding and unpacking all of this is my 2 kids and what they're, navigating separately, and their paths being different, but the parallels between their situations have really, it's given me a lot to process and kind of, think about. And that's, I think that then when it comes to labeling disability, I think the biggest hesitation is, comes back to stigma and ableism. I think some people are very afraid to use the term disability because of what it means to them in their own, in their own inside of themselves and based on their experiences and what they've absorbed from our culture. And one of the biggest things that I talk about in the book is that, everybody has ableism in them. There's no way that you can live in this culture that we live in and not absorb, ableism. It surrounds us. And so it doesn't make you a bad person if you recognize yourself in some of these things. But that's what I think it comes down to when we talk about, the label of disability. And the reason why some people are very hesitant to use it is because of, stigma.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely found it in myself. And you say a similar thing in the introduction about using the term disability for yourself.
Yep.
And what, and I have never used it for myself. And in reading your introduction, I was like, oh, and that's because I'm so scared, like the word itself.
Okay.
You know what I mean? There's this stigma around it. It's like, well, I'm not disabled. I just have ADHD. And I will throw out right away that I feel like, because Carrie and I have shared stories of our work history of like things that didn't always go well in a review for Carrie, but for me, I think being a guy, there's certain things that guys are allowed to do.
What?
I know. Sorry,
It's my worldview.
What are you talking about? Say more. I don't know what you might be talking about.
Yeah. No, but I mean, just thinking about, so, I mean, it's your story to share, but that your job review, and you talk about it in the book, I think in the intro also, or somewhere early on, But it's like, well, I have the same personality and do the same thing, and no one's ever given me a negative review. Do you want to say
Sure.
anything? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the biggest things, and like one of the reasons why I kind of figured out I had ADHD that connected back to was just talking a lot. Talking is my thing. Talk and talk and talk. And I had, I'd been shamed for it many times when I was a kid. And so I think I just figured out like that I put it under lock sometimes, and I just shut myself down, and I'm, basically not free. I'm not the actual version of myself versus, in certain settings with certain people that I feel safe with, I'm more open and I allow myself to be more like myself and talk. But as I was, getting older and getting more comfortable in my skin and feeling like it was okay to be more of myself. And this was before ADHD was even on my radar, but just doing some other work on myself, being like, you're good how you are, like, just be free, be comfortable. And so I say I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so my variety of ADHD is definitely the high achieving, so anxious to hold all the pieces together, not wanting to make a mistake. And so I'd never had a bad performance review in my life. One particular performance review, I basically was told that I don't know when to stop talking, and that my colleagues and peers might be hesitant to want to interact with me because of talking too much. And I felt like I was hit by a truck. Like I had just been like, it knocked the wind out of me. And it was like all the shame from when I was a kid just came rushing back. And it put me into a really weird space for a while where I like couldn't even hardly tell my husband what happened. Like I could barely make the words come out of my mouth. I told a couple of my colleagues, and they, my colleagues were like, Carrie, that's not even true though. Like, yes, to talk, but like your colleagues aren't afraid to talk to you. Like it was, according to them at least, that, it was a poor representation of me actually. But even with all that, even with the reassurance of my coworkers, it took me getting to a place of like understanding that I had ADHD to be able to like tell that story and talk about it, because the shame ran so deep with me that even saying out loud that someone had told me as an adult that I talked too much was like so hard. So figuring out I had ADHD, now it's kind of like, yeah, I have ADHD and I talk a lot, that's me, like that's who I am. And having the like being able to connect it with that was just very freeing for me. I can tell myself a true story about myself now rather than a story that's not true about myself. And I think that I talk a lot that on my advocacy page, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned some of it in my book, which is that a diagnosis just helps us understand ourselves better, or our kids or whatever. And so like you can tell, you can attribute things to different things depending on what information you have. So if my story that I was telling myself before I have ADHD was, you won't shut up, you just, like you just keep going and going and going, and no one wants to be around. Like it was like a personal flaw, and it was this thing that was just like such a beat down for everyone around me. And now my story is, yes, I talk a lot, and there are people in my life that love me and they like me, even though I talk a lot, and I do have good things.
And because you talk a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to podcasting.
I wrote it in my.
That's like everyone I know is ADHD, but that's because they all podcast.
I record podcasts in my car by myself, just talking. No one's there to listen to me. I have a lot of really good points. I think in my acknowledgement section, I talk about how like they're the people that I'm closest to in my life. None of them are surprised that I have enough words to fill a book. And there are those people, my mom, who I used to just walk around the house. I just follow her around the house and like talk at her, just like whatever I was thinking. And one thought went to the next, and she just, listened to me and let me, she probably listened to half of it, I'm sure she had to like disconnect and do other things, but that's for our kids, the same thing is true. Like when they get diagnosed, we now have more information about them, and the stories that we might have been telling if they struggle with behavior. Well, are they a bad kid? Or do they have this, are they dysregulated and they need supports? Like the behaviors or the person, who the person is still the same, but like a diagnosis can be super powerful because it can come with accommodation, access.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's
that comes up a
oh,
lot
go ahead.
in this when I teach this class. It's the class
Mhm.
is called the exceptional child, which I wish I could change. I kind of wish I could change, but I can't. But the conversation comes up a lot about, well, there'll be some students who say, I don't believe in labels, or why do we need to label? And then this 8 weeks, I have a student who's very open about her autism diagnosis, and she will talk about how kind of freeing it was to finally have a word. She was diagnosed as an adult, to finally have like validation for the ways she thought she was like essentially living wrong,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
that really helped her. And she now has, a different way of talking about herself in
Yep.
her different
There's
relationships, and getting the supports, that are helpful. And I definitely have been in the we over label, or we do
Yeah.
amateur labels that maybe aren't helpful camp, but overall, especially if it's someone who has the diagnosis telling you, this word really helps me.
right.
This explanation really helps me.
Yeah. Autismnotweird.com or autisticnotweird.com
Uh-huh.
had a meme recently, I think, or at least I came across it recently, where it shows like people pointing to this kid and saying naughty, lazy,
Exactly.
violent, disruptive,
Label.
antisocial, crazy. Yeah.
They're getting labeled anyway. Yeah.
And this
And
person, yeah, and then the
label.
parent saying, I'm not going to seek a diagnosis because I don't want them labeled.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's
Exactly.
one way or another, you get labeled. It's just,
They are going to get labeled. Yeah. And
Yeah.
they're going to get labeled without any support, without any understanding, without any of that. And that's takes such a big hit,
Yeah.
on the self-esteem and just the existence of the
Yeah.
person themselves.
Yeah.
And
That's so important.
I can see, like, if you follow the train far enough, the whole no labels train far enough, if we lived in a world that just supported everyone as individuals, then we could get to a place where we don't need labels, but we
Uh-huh.
don't live in that world. Like, we live in a world where things are supposed to fit in boxes, neatly into boxes, and we have systems that people are supposed to fit into, and in order to be in this setting, this is what you need to do, and in this setting, this is what you need to do. And so without those labels, people are not supported enough to do whatever it is that those labels are so needed to be able to say, this thing that you're asking of me, I can do it, but I'm going to need this X, Y, and Z to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, like, I do kind of see this train of this line of thinking that if we lived in a different type of world, maybe there's hope that someday we could get there.
Mm-hmm.
But we definitely have to, take into account where we are right now. And you can create a safe little cocoon where if you have a perfect little community, someone may not need those labels in order to function in your community.
Mm-hmm.
With your care. But like, as soon as they step out of your community, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a school environment, whatever, when they move on to the next level, the next place, the next job, the next town, whatever, they may not have that community. And
Yeah.
it might come back to super rigid. And now I'm trying to fit into these systems without my label, without my support, without my accommodation. So I think that's why it can be so important to, if you are struggling, I think some people can, not necessarily have a label because they're doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can help them understand themselves. That's kind of where, like, I feel like I am right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that but it also has a lot to do with, like, my privilege that I have, and that I have been able to set a schedule where I'm a consultant and I get to work 3 days a week under very, certain constraints where I'm not overwhelmed and not overscheduled, and I don't have too much on my plate that I need to juggle. And like, not everybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I basically have been given the gift of setting the parameters to have a life that's very ADHD friendly after learning like what I need and what's really hard for me.
Yeah.
So, but not everybody gets to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it also comes down to, will it help me? I think a lot of
right.
people seek a label or a diagnosis because, will this help me in some way?
Yeah.
Yeah, I found, I taught in the classroom for 25 years, 26 years, and my ADHD actually helped with, working in preschool. Like, there's 20 things happening in the room. It's like, yeah, isn't that
I got
great?
them all.
I'm totally, yeah.
Good.
And go play with these kids for a little while, then go help over
Mhm.
here, and then when I started, coaching and doing, so I was in the office a lot.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I'd work for like 45 minutes and like, oh, I just want to go down and like talk to, people over in that, and and it was a big building that I was working. So I'd literally like walk down to HR or whatever. And now I'm going to go up to the, autism day treatment, offices or whatever. I'm just like walking all over the place because I could not sit
Just
for more than
stay
45
in one
minutes.
spot. Yeah.
Yeah. And
The paperwork parts of my job, that's the part that I really like. I can make myself get through it, but it's the part that I find is just like, feels like excruciating for me.
yeah.
It's like the sitting down, and the note will take me like 3 minutes to write, and I'll
Right.
find myself wandering around my house and I'm like, just do the note.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do it. It will take you a fraction of the time that you've
Yeah.
spent avoiding it, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I had, Anna McRae was my boss for a while and had the sort of like, and now if any former coworkers are listening, they'll discover but she would like, yeah, go out in the school forest and write,
Yes.
because like, I'll just tell everyone else that you're at it, you're over in HR right now or whatever. Like, so she sort of like covered for me because she knew I'm going to get the work done better if I'm actually sitting outside and doing it. And, yeah, and actually my first two books, I wrote mostly outside,
Yeah.
And
That's
this one I was worried because I was writing in the winter, but
Oh,
now
yeah.
I'm
You're
medicated.
like, what am I gonna do?
Now he's
Well,
medicated.
that's kind of support that, like,
Yeah.
that, I mean, I think talking about employment, right? Like, people with disabilities don't grow up and then they're just all of a sudden not disabled anymore. But like, you see employment, I feel like there's a drastic drop, like in early childhood and in schools and stuff. Like, there's more talk about, inclusion and things like that. But as you get older, that stuff I think fades away and the expectations get even more rigid.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that these discussions are very important for the whole lifespan because, having a supervisor that says, go outside and write, like a neurodivergent friendly supervisor that's like, I can see what you need and I want you to do what you need so that you can make your good work. Not,
Right.
well, but I really would rather you sit at this desk. So that's what we do. We sit at the
Right.
desk.
And you have to be fair because your office mates or whatever aren't able to, or I mean, they could actually.
Yeah.
But it's that idea of, and this actually gets into the whole school thing. I think it's important that we remember it's also about work, but like, we had this online discussion, Heather and me and a few others about mixed ages, right? And the problem of we create these schools where everyone's like, even, infants and sometimes even younger infants and then older infants and then younger toddlers and older toddlers and, first grade, second grade. And what happens is even any, you talked about the boxes, even any, like, just like, this child who's like taking a while to learn to button their coat or their parents buy them, things that are the fasteners that are harder or whatever. And it's like, well, no, we need everybody to be able to do this, or and it just, or we're making an accommodation. And it's like accessibility is like a bigger issue, right? That if we were more accessible, we wouldn't need so many accommodations.
Right.
Yeah, it's so systemic. I mean, it's like, it's a big thing that like, you can, I think it comes down to that rigidity and like the fact that people aren't really allowed to be individuals with individual needs and individual strengths and individual challenges because of how rigid we are and how we group. And I think the mixed ages thing is a beautiful thing because kids can be in different places. Kids can be working on whatever it is that they're able to work on at the time and not comparing themselves to their peers. And that was a big thing for Pete, my older one, when he was struggling with, when we were figuring out his learning disability, was that he was majorly comparing himself to everybody around him. And he was at that age where developmentally they really start, looking around at the people around them and figuring out who am I in comparison to all these other people. But then you add the learning disability on top of it. And it was very much he was spending so much of his energy just, why is it that he's already done with his work and I can't even get started? Or, well, how come they can read that and I can't read that? And it ended up consuming all of his energy, the comparison where there wasn't any room left in him or any energy left for him to just be able to learn, to be able to absorb something that was interesting to him because he was so consumed by inadequacy and comparing himself to his peers. And so he ended up doing a Montessori school for a couple of years that was mixed grade, 4th, 5th, and 6th. And it was the perfect thing for us to have done with him because he needed a different setting and he needed a chance to just breathe and catch his breath and develop some confidence. And then he, ended up going back to middle school, back into a very traditional, our neighborhood middle school. That was his decision. But it was after he had a chance to like get his head above the water and be like, I can learn. Like and we'd figured out his learning disability and we'd figured out what he needed. And, now he, knows about his own supports and his accommodations, and he knows about his 504, and he knows that he can talk to his teachers about it if he needs to, to talk about his 504 and bring it up. But that rigidity is such a big, there's so much to this discussion, and that rigidity is a really, I think, foundational piece of it, which is that we don't allow for variability of human condition. It's so narrow what we expect.
Yeah. And when we do, it's seen as special treatment, like a negative connotation. Like,
well, the
my
exceptional
husband is,
child.
Right, exactly. Why I want to change the name.
We have to make a form for it. We have to have a meeting when it's just, we could just do it. What they need. Yeah.
My husband is disabled, and he had a lot of that as an adult at work. When he was younger, he didn't always have the accommodations either, but he really started to feel it at work when he needed just to survive, those kind of basic things. But I think for me that also, and as I was listening to you, it reminded me, of course, the folks, the disabled folks need and deserve those accommodations, right? It's about equity and basic human decency, I think. But and I think maybe, Mike, your book was the one that was what made me sort of shift this thinking or think differently, that it benefits everybody. Even the people who are like, oh, special treatment, they're still benefiting from a system that just wants to support everybody in the space.
Yeah, 100%. Like when you actually develop things around, disabled people, there's many other people that benefit from changing, like design, just the architectural design. There's more than just wheelchair users that can benefit from a ramp, like one example. But even when it comes to executive functioning types of supports that you can just bring in and make a part of a classroom environment, there's, it's not just for the kids who are labeled with, a condition that comes with executive functioning challenges. There are lots of kids that's not on anyone's radar who will also benefit from targeting those things or putting those supports in place. So yeah, I think it's completely true that a big difference can be made by just making that part of the original plan, making that part of the system that you build and that you develop. Because like we said, that can turn into one of those places where, the kids who are on IEPs don't have to stand out. They don't have to be pulled out of class as much. They don't have to, bring up the 504 plan to their teacher or whatever. Like, it's kind of that talking about moving in that direction, like that's, if we can keep moving in that direction, where it's not something that's so that you have to make a whole thing to get those things, or it's just built in.
It's pretty basic. Yeah.
When we're working with, like, specifically, the preschool, the birth to 5 age group, some of the disabilities aren't like discovered yet, right? Like they haven't been diagnosed, they haven't been assessed, they're just little, and there's such a wide variation in development anyway that it's like just so much better practice to just get into that habit of thinking about accessibility and thinking about belonging.
And I think accessibility, people often go to these like physical things, right? And that's where I feel like higher ed really does a disservice by not really focusing on executive function skills, right? That every child with the age group you and I work with, or you work with the students who work with, they're all developing all of their executive function skills. So all the children, you could, you know, and that's where the term disability is like you could say every single child's disabled in the sense that they don't have a fully developed executive function.
Mhm.
You know, so they are all neurodivergent compared to the adults who are making the standards.
Yeah.
But just these simple things of like saying children's names
Mhm.
often. Don't assume when they are, you know, trying to talk, just saying things like use your words or tell them you don't like that rather than, are you upset at Johnny? Oh,
Mhm.
what did Johnny do that you didn't like? And start using the name. Because we often, I mean, I know I am guilty of this. I will just say, talk to them, or did you ask them?
Mm.
And not say, did you ask Julie? Or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
just saying the name, and yet what kind of working memory do they have at this age? They don't remember, like they could probably stand there for 10 seconds and then tell you the child's name.
Mhm.
But at the moment, especially if they're getting angry or upset, they can't call forth that name. I don't know the speech language like
Oh yeah.
terminology for it,
Yeah.
but right,
Like,
they can't access it.
Access it.
yeah, access
Yeah.
it's a label, you know, a name is a label, and you
Yeah.
have to be
Right.
able to find it in your brain, and it,
Yeah. And so the way we just assume that kids are actually, you know, like 40-year-olds or something, like
Yeah.
fully formed executive function is amazing. And so it's that thing of if we did that for every child,
Yeah.
just assume they can't pull up that name right
Yeah.
away, or they need to like they can't just, oh, I told you that it's time to clean up. Why is it taking you 3 or 4 minutes to do that?
Mhm.
Yet when you know you do any public speaking as an adult, you know when you say, you know, welcome everyone, you know that it's now going to take 3 to 4 minutes for the adults to calm down enough to then
Sure.
start the
Yes.
program. But when it's a preschool class, we expect them to do it in 10
Right away.
seconds.
Yeah. It's
Need it
sort of to me like the way we're sort of shifting from talking about trauma responsive care to being trauma informed. So we don't have to wait, or the child doesn't have to prove their trauma to us before
Mhm.
we you know, act in ways that we know are supportive of that. If we're trauma informed, we just assume that children need these things. And whether
Right.
they have a trauma we believe or not, doing these things is
Yeah.
just
Before I start a
healthy for
relationship with
them.
this
Yeah.
child, I just want to make sure, do I
Yeah.
actually have to build a relationship with them, or are they
Exactly right. Do they deserve this relationship?
Yeah.
Is it really how does it benefit me to do this? Yeah. So it's almost like being disability informed.
it's a proactive mindset rather
Yeah.
than a reactive mindset, and like
Yeah.
being proactive can apply to so many things, but it's kind of like we know so much now, and like there's so many things that we could be putting in place rather than waiting and only putting them in place for certain groups or
Mhm.
certain people. We can put in place like so many of these areas.
Yeah.
Many more kids will benefit from just doing things
Yeah.
in a certain way.
And hot take, we will benefit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, things are going to be more manageable overall. I feel like if we're
I'm just
doing
thinking the
things
anxiety that we cause ourselves as
Yeah.
teachers and the kids when it's like, come on, we have to do this. You know, we're
Yeah.
rushing to do this. And it's like if we all slowed down and we
Yeah.
all, you know, and that's where I think Carol Garboden Murray, who does work on care,
Yes.
it comes in so important. Because I wanted to mention to you, Carrie, when we were at the playground
Mhm.
last summer and Pete and Dan were out playing,
Mhm.
the way Pete was aware of Dan,
Mhm.
and if Dan was getting, you know,
Yeah, start
getting
to
whatever,
get dysregulated. Yeah.
yeah, that Pete was right there. And if Pete couldn't, you know, deal with it
Yeah.
on his own, he then came and got you.
Mhm.
And just that like ability, you know, talk about a mixed age environment too.
Mhm.
And it's people who don't know each other, so they have to kind of, people make assumptions about, okay, when I'm about to go down the slide, this other person is going to know to get out of the way, or you know, whatever, all
Mhm.
these social assumptions that may or may not happen, and then you have to negotiate. And so it was really interesting to, when you were talking about Pete and the 4th through 6th grade, you know, mixed
Yeah.
age, I'm like, oh, I saw him in a mixed age environment and he did amazing.
Yeah.
All of the social skills, the
Yep.
executive function skills, the
Lots of
caring.
benefit there. Yeah, because of the just I'm a big fan of mixed age, like,
Yeah, me too.
because it gives kids a chance to, like, there's opportunity for lots of different things there, not only just showing, not only just being able to demonstrate something that you've learned and you've got confidence, but just that, like, the younger kids looking up to the older kids, and like, that's what I'm going to be learning, like, I'm going to be
Right.
able to do those things. I don't know, I feel like there's so many things, but
Yeah.
yeah, Pete, I think that there's that, when you have that setting of kids looking out for each other too, like, that they gain, there's definitely empathy pieces there that they gain. Like, there's social things that they gain that you can't really necessarily teach. Like, you can't demand that the kids like look out for each other, but when you put them in certain parameters, I think that a lot of people have that naturally inside of them to look out for each other. I think that's how we're wired. I think that's how we're just wired as like human creatures. And it's another really important thing. I think it can tie back to a lot of these themes that we're talking about, which is just, if kids are raised to be anti-ableist and they're raised to talk about people who have different needs and different challenges and I need different levels of support, and it's not this person versus this person, typical versus not typical. Like, if we can make it just like a bigger discussion. I talk a lot in the book about, like, one of the things that comes up in the book is, talking to your kids about if you come across certain situations. And so one of them is, if your kid asks you about a stranger, why does he do that way? I said, it sounds oversimplified, but you can just say, because that's what works for him. Like, you don't need to speculate, because if you don't know this person personally, then you don't know for sure why. And then you're leading into speculating diagnosis and speculating personal information that isn't ours to speculate. I think our kids can, like, that's the way I've always just talked to my kids. And and then I'll compare it back to them and say, how you do this way, and how you do this way. Well, that person does this that way because that's what works the best for them. And that we don't have to understand it on like a personal level to accept it. That idea of, I think there's not misconception, but some people say, oh, you have to understand something to be able to accept it. And I think that that's like, you don't have to, it depends on how you're using the word understand, but you don't have to like be able to personally connect with someone's decision to be able to accept what they're doing. That we can basically say, we do what we need to do and we need to give each other the space and the grace and the understanding to say, I trust that person knows what they need. I think my kids have just, that's the way we talk about it. And it's not contested. It just, that person knows what supports they need. That person knows how to get along in the world. That person knows,
Yeah.
My book, go ahead.
We keep doing that to each other, Mike. I just love that, of just saying that's what works, because just like a couple of weeks ago, one of our quiz questions was like, imagine you have a 3-year-old who uses a wheelchair, and a child asks their mom, why does she do that? And the mom says, oh, don't say that. That's not. And a lot of the students answered, well, I would be so worried about using the wrong language or saying the wrong thing and offending. But if we're just saying, well, that's what works for them, that takes care of that too. Like, we could still go do a little learning if that's our
you
our
can do
fear,
a little, like, you can list a few options. Like, I mean, it's possible that this person, that their leg, they don't walk on their legs. It's possible that this person does walk on their legs, but they get tired or they have pain. There's a few different reasons that might be, but because we don't know them personally,
fall risk or whatever.
But because we don't know them personally, I can't answer that question, but I can just say that they know that using a wheelchair is what works best for them. And so that's why, where you can do the education, but without inserting like anything into their story, right? That we don't know.
And in my book, this actually went very well. So I don't know, our brains are almost, but I sort of, in talking to teachers in a classroom, of like, you don't need to know the reason a child uses a wheelchair. What you need to know is, can they get around? Do they have access to everything in the wheelchair? Like, that's the part that you care about. And then I use the analogy of, so if a child, is a wheelchair user and needs a little more space at, your circle time or whatever, or at the lunch table or whatever, like, we would be okay with that. So what about the child who needs to move more?
Right.
Can they
Not only
take up
would
more
be okay with
space?
it, we'd be like bragging about how we made this
Oh,
wheelchair
totally.
accommodation in our
Yep.
classroom.
Kid.
So I love this
Yeah.
connection, Mike.
Yeah, yeah. And then the child who's like flopping, like leaning back at circle time,
Not
like
a lot
against
of
the
understanding for that. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it doesn't go both ways.
Mhm.
Right. There's a moral judgment instead, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so that's all I was going to say about
Yeah.
it. But that idea of, yeah,
I feel like when we
lost
talk
it.
to teachers and like adults who are with people, it's kind of almost like you were saying, I don't need to know all the ins and outs of why they're in the wheelchair.
Right.
I need to figure out is what is my relationship with and responsibility to their mobility.
Right.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah,
Ooh,
yeah.
I like that.
That's
Yeah.
what I need to know is what do I
Don't
need to
forget, Mike.
because of their mobility, like what is my responsibility
Yeah.
to ensure what they need based on their mobility parameters,
Right.
that's really all that we need. And I do talk a little bit in the book about kind of just getting that information from people and making a grand, like I was talking about when I do, not like I host events very often, but if I do, I've been trying to do a grand invitation to like, if there are any accommodations or accessibility needs that you have, please let me know, rather than singling it. Oh, I'm going to contact my one friend, like
Mhm.
putting it in every time I correspond, because there might be people that I don't even know who might say, hey, can you just make sure the music stays down a little bit? Because I get really overwhelmed with loud music, like without opening that door. So people aren't going to feel comfortable with bringing that up. But if you show yourself as a safe person to talk about access and accommodation with, then they might be like, okay, I can actually tell her about this thing because she wants me to. She's invited me to.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I was going to add then was exactly what you just said, except then with young children, they're not going to be able to know or tell you.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
just like, oh, I need to know what to do, when, there's a wheelchair user, but I don't know why this child keeps going under the table.
Mhm.
And you don't necessarily have to, like, there should be less about why
Mhm.
and more about what do you do to include them,
Mhm.
right? And at times there are those things of like, oh, this, whatever, a child's needs are getting more than I can do in the classroom, and that's fine. I'm not saying that you never,
Yeah.
because as we said, the labels actually open doors to other services and all that.
Right.
But just that idea that teachers often don't want to do something unless they're told this child has an IEP or they have a,
Mhm.
whatever, like they don't just like, oh, this child just really whatever likes to do that, or
Mhm.
this child has a harder time waiting.
Mhm.
And rather than making this moral judgment of therefore I'm going to have this child go last because they keep saying they want to
Ugh,
go,
God. Yeah.
instead you could realize, oh, this child is waiting as long as they can, which turns out to be about half a second,
A long time.
and
Very short.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
like it's just this like thing of you can challenge kids when they are regulated to sort
Yeah.
of like, can they wait a little longer, and they let someone else go first
Mhm.
once in a while, but it's like insisting they do it every time or insist they go 10th instead of second,
Because
just
that'll teach them.
right. It's just that thing, and there won't be a diagnosis for half the kids that may have a diagnosis later. But
one of the
at
other
the age group I'm working with,
Yeah, one of the other things I have noticed occasionally on the topic of labels is that there are some early childhood teachers who really want the label because they feel like then I am off the hook, right? If there's a diagnosis that's leading to this thing I don't understand and that's inconvenient for me, then therapy and medical services will take care of it. And then they'll fit my system instead of saying, oh, this diagnosis will help me understand why it's happening and what we can do here. And yeah, the services that they get will also help. But I have seen some who are like, okay, phew, it's not my responsibility anymore because they need occupational therapy or medication or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, it's like probably an automatic, like this kid will not get out from under the table. So who can I call? Like,
Yeah.
who
Right,
can I call?
right.
Because they will not be at they won't say it's circle, and we have circle over here and he's under the table. So
Yeah.
this doesn't fit in my
Yeah.
classroom.
Right.
That model, like the model that we talk about of just kind of like looking at kids as individuals, like when you were talking, Mike, my brain went to just what my tendency would be, like with the kid who can't wait, would be to add in a thing of, I think it looks like waiting is really, really hard for you. You know, like
Yep.
your body has a hard time waiting. You know, it might be because you don't know how long it's going to take. It might just be because you don't know what to do with your body. It might be because you're worried. But let's come up with a plan. It's like when you kind of have that mindset of like individual needs and you start looking at your kids that way, that all 20 of them have their own little things, you know, like
Right.
some of them might have needs that are louder or bigger, and the ones that may end up needing even more support than what you can give them. But they're all going to have their little things, you know, they're all going to have their little things that, like, I think it's so important to talk to kids about their individual, like their body, and what is your body telling you right now, and what is it that you are, you know, you're really having fun, or oh, you're really struggling right now, and your body's saying that you need a break, or there's just so much power in that, because kids are going to get bigger, and then as they get bigger, they're gonna, it's like almost like a foundation of that, and making that part of the
Right, just what you do. Yeah. There was a child that used to he had a hard time waiting. And when there were things where like the teacher like, oh, I have to, you know, talk to this person first, and then we, you know, because they're going to get our snack, whatever. But the way she'd do it is like, why don't you go make a UPS truck? And this child, like, that he loved building UPS trucks out of Magnetiles or Tinker Toys or something. So that's he'd go, oh yeah, and he'd go do it, you know,
And then it
she'd
would be
come
his
back,
turn.
and then it'd be time, and then she just, you know, and she would have those times of saying, yeah, I know you know, it's hard for you to wait, but I also know you like to make UPS trucks. And so if I really can't, you know, do it, but she would like sort of model these things to the child. And yeah, it was amazing.
Level, like it has to be on their level, right? Like,
Right.
but even just recognizing that and seeing, okay, what I can see that he needs is something else to think about during this transition time, during this period of time where he doesn't have this to do, but he, you know, like his brain needs to be thinking about something else, and reading into that, you know, and responding to that on an individual level. You know, some people, well, you can't do that for all the class. No, but why would you? Like,
Right.
I'm waiting. Like, he's the only one. So, you know, you see people a lot of times kind of dig into that, like dig into the idea of individualizing, because, well, we can't do this for everyone. And it's like, well, we're not asking you to do this thing with everyone, because this kid is the only one who needs this thing. And we might be asking you to do this thing with this other kid, that's what he needs. And not to take away from what teachers have on their plates, because they do have. I definitely don't want.
But they're spending the time either way.
Yes. You are gonna, it's gonna be one way or another. You're either gonna be chasing them around or trying to pull them from out under the table or whatever, or you put in that extra little, you figure it out what it is, you put in that extra little strategy that brings about a smoother transition, whatever it is.
It's skill development for us too, then, right? We aren't all born knowing how to do all of these things. So it is, I think that's the other part of it is, well, I just don't know how to think of those kinds of things. There are people out there who share those kinds of ideas, and you can build on that then, you know what I mean? Like,
I think about my schooling, and I don't know if this is how it is for teachers, but like, you know, when I was in school, we were very much just kind of taught how to, like, it was all just super systematic, you know? So I was like thinking about, like, with speech therapy, you do one-on-one. It's not that we're doing all group stuff, but, you know, some people are managing really big caseloads. And so you are figuring out how to cram in stuff into, so it's all kind of more thinking about the way to fit what you do into systems, and not a whole lot of talk about the individualization piece. And so I found that when I was writing my book, that's a theme that just kept coming up over and over again, is just thinking about the people as individuals. And just even kind of shifting even a little bit into that mindset, you know, of like, instead of being a group of people as a group of people that are all going to behave in the same way. And that's what you need them to do, which again, I get when you've got lots and lots of kids in your classroom and you kind of really need them to all do the same thing. But like you said, you're going to spend the time either way, because they're not all going to behave the same, and they're not all going to act the same. They're not all going to be able to fit into that box. But I just, you know, I'm hoping that over time things are shifting into more talk about just people as individual humans. And just the power in leaning into that as much as you can. You know what I mean? Not like we want to make everybody do the same thing, but like the incredible things about everybody not being the same, you know?
Right. And I think that's where I'm going to turn then to your book, because
It's about
just
time.
like, yeah. Oh, did you write a book? No. No, but just the way, because the way you break down the chapters, I'm just going to read a few of the,
Yeah.
the
Like
amazing boy who put on his shoes, the presumption of
Oh
incompetence.
my gosh, I love
You're
it
so
already.
brave. Disability is an inspiration. What's wrong with you? Disability is deficit. That's so sad. Disability is tragedy. Can I pray for you? Disability is something to be cured. I mean, each of these, and like you think about, I mean, because Heather, when you said these aren't skills you learn, and what I love about the way you broke down this book is it's kind of like there's certain ones where I can feel superior and say, well, I don't do that, but I know people who do, so I can read about how horrible they are. And then then it gets to a chapter, it's like, oh, I do that.
Yep.
Like, okay, so here's something I can learn. No, but I do think it is, Heather and I had a discussion. There was a debate in her class about, I think it was person first language or identity first language.
Yeah.
And, just the way people get so, and it's almost like people removed from neither person, I don't think, was actually identified as disabled or whatever,
Yes,
but
one
like,
did actually. So it was even worse that the other student was
my God,
like,
the
oh
person
no, I reject that.
Yeah. How dare you suggest? Well, maybe they were going to then say, I don't see you as disabled, which is
Yeah, we also
chapter
had
in
a
the book.
conversation about a comedian who does a bit about how they don't see Down syndrome as a disability because Down syndrome is just joy. And the person sharing that story didn't understand why that was like ableist. And there was a time where I certainly would not have even occurred to me to question that. I would have thought, oh, that's so nice.
Yes.
So it is a sort of a responsibility for us when we feel that disconnect because of the positions we're in working with children and working with even our colleagues. When we feel that discomfort, we can't just say, yeah, oh well, I reject that because it makes me uncomfortable. We have to be able to sit a little bit.
Right. And that happens with a lot of things.
Yeah.
You're
Thinking of our gender episode.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna get an automatic defensiveness.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of times happens, but just like, hold on. Like
Right.
remember, go back to these things we talked about. You're not a bad person. You're here because you want to learn. You picked up this book because you want to learn.
Yeah.
Keep going. Like, just keep going. Did you read the part about the person first versus identity first language? I did write a little bit about there.
Yeah, I think you did in here. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what you said.
I mean, really,
he has ADHD.
Oh, actually, I do remember what you said. Yeah,
like people have the right to choose. Like, here's I explain both. And I basically say, a large part of the disability community is leaning over toward identity first. But however, there are people that do identify as person first. And like, you don't get to tell the person that they're wrong because it's their own experience. If they're a disabled person, they get to decide how they be labeled. And, it's kind of like, if you are even in a position where you need to know, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, how many times do we actually need to know? Like if you're introducing someone, like if you're in a close relationship with them, it might come up.
Yeah.
But this was another theme that came up over and over in the book, which was a lot of times you actually don't need to know. Like a lot of times this is not your business. And unless there's a reason, like an actual reason why you feel inclined, like you need to get this information, you probably actually don't need it because it's just a common ableist thing that people kind of expect that disabled people are going to just spill all of their personal private information and lay everything out on the table. It's almost like an assumption that everyone is entitled to their business.
Right. And, I can see it, like, if you just think of different identities, thinking that, like, if someone, wanted to introduce, say they were like, I'm a gay man, like, you wouldn't say that to everything you're doing, but if you're on a dating site, that's going to be important. Or if you're, someone's introducing you to their son, like, they're like, like there are times when it might come up. And the same thing, like there are times, and then there are times that don't make sense. And for whatever reason with disability, we, yeah, it's almost like, well, we have to know. Like, why would you hide that from me? Or,
Yeah, and I talk about
Right.
like it's we talk about it's not that, like, I think on my page one time I talked about how like my younger son just gets so exasperated now when people ask
oh,
him about blindness. And it's
Oh.
like, is it because he's ashamed of his blindness? No, it's because he's 11 and it's not interesting to him.
right.
He's like,
Yeah, I
this,
remember
I
that
don't want
post.
to
That was
talk
a really good
about
one.
this. Like, I want to talk about my favorite thing. I want to talk about Bop It. He'll talk to you about Bop It all day long.
Uh-huh.
But
Yes,
like
he
when
will.
people ask him a question, he's like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
And I
So my
understand.
favorite, when I met him, and I said, I don't know anything about Bop It. And he was like, oh, and you
You're
interrupted and
perfect.
said, yeah, you just said, tell him, choose 5
Oh,
things to
yeah.
tell him about Bop It. And that was like, it was like, oh, you've been down this road. 'Cause
Also, like,
it
he
still was quite a bit.
Yeah.
oh yeah. I
But
mean, and he's also, he can figure out how to say 3 things in one too,
oh,
really.
for sure. It
But
was something about there's these different series, and then he told me about each of them, even though that was just
That was
one
one
thing.
thing.
He
Uh-huh.
actually told me like 5 different things within
Nice.
that.
but I don't discourage him when he gets frustrated about that. And we've talked
Mhm.
of
Oh, yeah.
different ways that he can decline, or he can say to people, I don't want to talk about that. Or he's got a couple clever, like one time he told someone, Google it. And I was like, ooh, ooh. I was like, where'd you get that idea? We were both like, I was like, oh, that was clever,
Nice.
but I want him to feel, I don't want to set him up. I talk about in the book how when I was very first his mom after we adopted him, I was in such a different place on my journey. And I like set him up many times where people would ask and I just start answering, without asking him if it was okay,
Mhm.
all about all the stuff. And then I, started listening to more and more disabled people. And I started being like, oh, I should have been doing that. Like
Right.
that basically is setting a foundation of him thinking that it is expected that he share
Mhm.
his
Right.
information with people. So then we had a hard stop and we had an explicit conversation about it. And I'd say, hey, I've told people stuff that I shouldn't have told them. I'm not going to do that anymore. But I also want you to know that you don't have to tell anyone anything ever. If you want to, you
Right.
can, but you also don't have to. And
Mhm.
so, learning those lessons as we go and then pivoting, we learn new information, we pivot and go,
Right.
whoop, no, we didn't.
Right.
But I also hope that's something I hope that comes from this book too, is people who read it who are connected to disability. I think the book was written as a parenting book for, if you had to pick a target audience, for parents of non-disabled kids to learn how to, raise their kids in ways that they feel like are the ways they want to raise their kids. But I'm hopeful also that people who are connected to disability in some way will read it and also
Sure.
then feel empowered, to speak up for themselves, or to say to someone, that's none of your business, like maybe they haven't been comfortable doing that in the past, but sometimes you just have to see somebody say that. You don't have to tell them, like, it's not their
Yeah.
business. So, I have a lot of hopes for the book and
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So
Well, it is a great book.
Yeah, and I mentioned at the beginning that it's not available till July, but it's available for pre-order, and I want to make that really clear that people can go still order
Yep.
the book. So would you also share your advocacy page where people
Yeah,
can find that?
so it's called Inform, with a lowercase I and then the rest all in. But if you type in, I have a website now, so it's informdisability.com. And from informdisability.com, there is like a little Facebook icon where you can click, and that's for people who are on Facebook, that's where I put the majority of my content. I just recently also created an Instagram page. It's newer, but I'm pretty sure you can get to that through or whatever. And so that's where I do a lot of my, posts just about my own experiences. And I share a lot of, disability content created by disabled content creators and, all the people that I've learned from and who are a foundation of my book. I try to share as much as I can and amplify their voices as much as I can. And so that's the website's a good place to start. There is like information about the book, and there is like a click to where you can order the book, to pre-order, and it's just right around the corner. It's 2 months,
Yeah.
but I feel like it's gonna be here in no time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're about an hour, maybe a little bit over an hour. And it does not feel like it's been that long. I
So
probably
fun. Like
should
I've
wrap
been
this
having so much
up.
fun talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to have you back on once I've had a chance to read the book. I want
I would love that. Please, anytime.
yeah.
Honestly, like I
Yeah.
said, I enjoy, I told Mike when we talked, I was like, this is my jam. Like this
Yeah.
makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I just feel alive and like talking to people who want to talk about these things. So
Yeah.
anytime,
Love it.
anytime.
Love it. Mike, did you have any last thoughts you wanted to get in?
Well, so we covered one chapter. I just want to go to the no.
Yeah. Let's just
No, I
work
was
our
thinking
way
the
down.
same thing of
Cover the
like
other
there's
14 real quick before we
Yeah.
log off.
yeah. No, I also was like, oh yeah, you definitely have to be on again. And we have to actually just meet up again. We haven't
Yes.
I know a bunch of different things, came up
We
over
had a
the school year.
weird year this year. We had a very uncharacteristic year with my younger son who fractured his hip, and it's been a
Ooh,
long road to get
ouch.
back to weight bearing, and
Yeah.
it's been a really wacky year, but we're on the other side of
Yeah.
it. So
Good.
Because there's supposed to be a Bop It museum that he had invited
We
me to.
did.
You did do it, but
we did a few. Yeah, we actually had the museum, the little place cards that we brailled are actually still taped around the toy
Wow.
room. That's where we had placed. Basically,
right.
I set up because my son just loves to talk about Bop Its. We
Mhm.
set up what we called the Bop It Museum, and he and I planned out like a specific structure of
Uh-huh.
like the things that he could say about each Bop It, and then he picked the Bop Its he was going to talk about, and we honed it into about a 30-minute. I know you could talk about Bop Its for 4 hours, but I think your audience is probably going to have about 30 minutes of listening in them. And so we set that up, and then we basically set the Bop Its up in the consistent way. So he knew exactly where to go find them, and he would bring them over to the chair, and he would talk about the 5 or whatever that he selected, put them back. And we did a couple of virtual ones, and we actually had a couple of in-person ones, and then that's when he got hurt. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we do Bop It
Yeah,
Museum.
yeah. Because I think that's where I
great.
had messaged you about trying to figure out like going right after work because
Yeah.
you live
Okay.
on that side of town, and then suddenly like I didn't hear anything, and then on your web or your Facebook or whatever I heard about the
I'm gonna
injury.
suggest that the rest of this conversation.
Oh yeah, we don't need. You were still recording, aren't we? Oh, sorry,
And
you're
we all
talking.
know I don't edit, so that's just
Here's
all background.
ADHD at its finest.
No, that's
Sorry,
I loved
what-
hearing about
what's
the
going
Bop It
on here?
Museum, so it was worth it. I just
I still want to be there, but yeah, no, I guess you're actually hosting.
The
So.
Bop It Museum, to tie back to the
Yeah.
episode, that basically is kind of like a way of, I've worked with a lot of mostly neurodivergent kids in my career.
yeah.
And the special interest angle is like, for me, really important. That's how I do all my treatment is centered on their interests. And kids, when they get to be the expert on something, like you just really see them shine, and it's a huge confidence booster. And so like with my speech clients, every opportunity that I get, if a kid is really into something, I think that could even apply down to early childhood. It's really into dump trucks. Can they just stand up in front of their friends and tell them 3 things about dump trucks? Like, because then they get that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got to say one more thing.
Okay.
This is how I'm going to close it out.
All right. Better be relevant.
It's relevant, and I hope to God my memory is right. But I think, Carrie, you said that when you would go pick up a child from, a classroom to go, and, the other kids would be like, why does she have to go, whatever. But you had told, like, you have a lot of important things to say, don't you? And it's like, yes. It's like,
yes,
I want to help you.
Yeah. How I talk to the kids. Yeah. I mean, writing this book really made me think a lot about the way that I talk about what I do as a service provider and the way that I interact with my clients. It has completely shifted the way I write goals. It's completely shifted the way I talk to parents. But it's very important to me now that when I meet a new client and that we continue to have ongoing conversations, that I explicitly talk to them about what are we doing together and why are we doing it? And, like for a kid who's getting our
she
kids
said,
therapy, like saying,
and it was like, you have a lot of important things to say, don't you? Yes.
You have a lot of important things to say, and sometimes people don't understand you. And that's
so I'm going to help you, do
I
that.
wanna
So then
that everyone understands your message, because your message is really important. And so we're going to learn how to say some sounds. We're going to teach our mouth how to do a few things. And then hopefully everything that you have to say, the people will be able to understand you because
Mhm.
it matters.
Yeah.
And I really started being very like mindful about doing that. And one of my current second graders teacher told me one day that after I had brought the kids back from speech, one of their friends, no, I was gone that day. And my friend was very concerned about when I was coming back and was I okay? And the kid said, "What's speech?" And the teacher started to answer. And my little client said, "Can I say?"
Oh,
And
great.
said, "Sure." And the kid basically said, "My teacher teaches me how to say certain sounds so that people can understand me." And his teacher said, he framed it in a completely positive way. There was no talk of I do this wrong, I can't say these things correctly. It's very important to me that I don't ever, you're
Mhm.
saying it wrong. It's
Mhm.
we're learning how to say sounds and because there is also diversity of speech. That's a whole nother topic I won't go into, but we don't all need to say
Yeah.
things exactly the same. The point is, can people understand you or not? If they can't understand you, that's a functional problem and you can't express yourself. That's why I'm here, So
Mhm.
it's really important to me how it's framed and how I talk to the kids about why they come and see me.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure one child said when they were like, why did she have to go? But it's like, because I have a lot of important things to say.
Yeah. It's a post on
Mic
my
drop.
Yeah, exactly. That's
that's
amazing.
that's everything to me is like knowing
Right,
that
right.
their message matters, that their message is really important and that it's really important that we make sure that they can communicate it. And that's like that's why I do
Mhm.
what I do. And that's not even just speaking with our mouth. It's
Uh-huh.
all of the kids have messages that they need to communicate. And my job is to make sure that they can do that in
Mhm.
whatever way makes the most sense for them.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But in a way that they know that they're not broken, that
Mhm.
they can learn new skills, but it's because they have really good things inside of them that we want to know that they can tell us if they want to tell us. That's the other
Mhm.
piece. You don't
All
have
right,
to
Heather, this is called a Minnesota goodbye. You better just
So
Very
anyway,
similar to a Nebraska goodbye. Um,
Kansas, and it's the same thing in Kansas. So
all right, Midwest goodbye it is then.
Midwest goodbye.
I mean, I'm in Indiana now. I just don't notice it. Anyway, that was important for factual in case someone challenged me, I guess. I don't know what that was for. Thank you very much, both of you,
Thank
for
you.
spending this time with me tonight. And I hope everyone flocks to your website and pre-orders that book, Carrie, because it sounds like it's going to be really important
Thank you so much.
for the work that we're all doing. All right, and thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.